Well, so Joyspan is basically the feeling of joy, purpose, fulfillment, meaning in your life, which is kind of what most of us are looking for, on the journey of life. It's we need our basic needs fulfilled, but actually, as you get older and wiser, you're kind of, working towards really what is going to motivate me to want to keep going. And so I think Joyspan is essentially trying to describe what are the intrinsic motivations of people. And human beings have a huge desire, but also need for being connected with other people. We're tribal animals, and I think that's really what we're starting to miss in this world that we have, which is very digitally driven. And so we are, there's so much isolation and loneliness, across all age groups, actually. I mean, I know the younger populations it's a specific problem. I know that's gripping a lot of government attention now because they're literally dropping out of the labour market, certainly in the UK. But yeah, so I think it's sort of like, it's a sort of stuff that you can't capture or measure in animal studies, which is where a lot of the longevity research is taking place. So we really have to understand really what drives humans' behaviour in life. And we need hope, we need love, we need all these sorts of things in our life. And actually and we have the science now to actually show its impact on our biology. So going back to measurement, so that's an area that I'm obviously really, really fascinated by, because of course you can measure things like cortisol, stress. Measuring the opposite of that is more difficult. But again, you can, oxytocin, all those sorts of things. Serotonin, there are all sorts of different, in terms of, the sort of basic biomarkers. But of course, we've got technologies like, which I'm interested in because of the raves, which are, in very sort of live, active environments, where you can start wearing wearable EEG sort of readers, where you can track, your brainwave activity and your emotions, how do you feel? So these are the sorts of things that we'll be factoring into the design of the experiment that we're sort of doing at the moment, so that we can actually cover across all the kind of classic biomarkers, both physical but also, emotional, and capturing that sort of before, during, and after that rave. But I think really what we're trying to do, which is a little bit more, I guess, tricky in some ways, it is about really trying to understand and measure, what human connection is, and what that feeling is when you are in someone else's orbit of energy. Because I think, you really see that in these environments when people are in close proximity. You kind of follow the energy of people. It's not what you say, it's just the energy. And it's fascinating. So that's what we're trying to understand, because I think that will partly explain why so much of the research that at the moment is taking place in animal models and test tubes and things, how do you actually make sure that that can translate across into the human model, who live with other people in communities, and we can see, like, from the experience, even going to like the blue zone idea, it's very basic stuff. They tend to be close-knit communities. They're cared for, loved. Age is venerated. If you're old, you're not thrown on the trash heap. You're looked after by your families, and you sort of are close to nature. You're close to all these things that are really important to human flourishing, which is only just now starting to capture the scientific imagination, through the Exposome, project. And I hope, through the research and the data that we'll be collecting at scale, we'll really start to hit government policy making. We'll hit the really big money sitting in investment funds, and recognizing that human and planetary health are so interconnected. And this is where climate change, air pollution, all these sorts of things, we need to be creating environments where we're not adding to the problem all the time. Because even with, with the GLP-1 inhibitors, that yes, they can reduce weight, and they are, but I still see that as something that kicks in too late. It's not part of a system change approach. So I'm not really into the extension of life. I see that as a side effect. If you get it right in terms of healthy life expectancy, the years lived in good health, if you really get it right, and that is, combining all the interventions and maybe, some of the sort of more futuristic ones in time, you can then close the gap between health span and lifespan. And that all you've got, which is basically the model of the supercentenarians, all you've got is this tiny little window where you might have some chronic diseases, multimorbidities, but actually the lessons of the supercentenarians, and of course they do have a genetic advantage, which many of us will not have, but that's what you want to do. You want to tighten up that period of multimorbidities till it's very, very tight, and then you basically die. There's a lot of evidence that shows that that the most of the cost in our healthcare systems is in that last stage of life. So you want to actually minimize that period. So I think focus on health span, and of course as part of that the Joyspan, because that will help you with your health span, and hopefully with all the things that we're learning about, all the different interventions, and most importantly, it's the interventions that will work for you as an individual. The N=1. That is the holy grail. So I actually have a problem with the word biohacking, because it's actually about working in symphony with your body that I'm more interested in. So it's not working against your body. It's actually about understanding you and understanding yourself, because the beauty about getting older, because a lot of people fear getting older, and I think people fear getting older because they think their life will get worse. And I would say, I think your life will only get better if you understand yourself and you accept who you are and what you're looking for in your life, which usually for a lot of people is actually some very basic stuff, which is usually free as well. So I think it is this acceptance of you as an individual, understanding what really drives your fulfillment and your purpose and the meaning in your life. We have a problem where, young people, they've lost religion, spirituality, and I think that is part of the reason why we have so many chronic mental health problems. They need something to look towards. So this is where spirituality, and this is where purpose and meaning, this is actually what help, and of course hope. There's a lot of data that shows how important hope is for your biology, and of course it's the placebo effect is part of that. Of course, if you believe that you are doing something to help you, it will probably help you. And actually, one of the biggest, your own assessment of how old you are, how you feel, is actually a pretty good indicator of actually your biological age, which is very, very interesting, because if you feel good, and normally it's because you're in pretty good health, but you're also in pretty good mental and sort of emotional health as well. You've kind of worked it out. So I think that is one of the nice things about getting older, is you kind of get to know yourself. Because let's face it, when you're in your 20s, especially in this day and age when you're constantly being compared in very visible ways in social media and all the rest of it, you're sort of thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not doing that, I haven't done that yet. It's all this peer pressure, and and I mean, we all face that in our 20s. I mean, I certainly did. And you have low self-esteem, low confidence. You think, oh, I'm not doing what I should be doing. And that, of course, that lack of self-esteem, that lack of self-confidence is the curse of being young. So, I would say that is the sort of thing that when you get older, those are the things that you don't have to worry about anymore, because you kind of get yourself now, So for me, and of course the whole idea of Longevity Rave, it's still an experimental format. I mean, we've been running it now for about a year or a year and a bit. And we've had, and the context and the triggers for Longevity Rave have been different. So yes, sometimes there's an after party for a longevity conference, and that was kind of an obvious place to take it. I speak a lot, and of course, Longevity Rave, so you can take it as an after party. But we also do them in mainstream music clubs. And what they're interested in the concept of Longevity Rave is bringing people back into the real environment, the real world of clubs, which, and of course, young people don't drink as much anymore. And of course, that's how the clubs used to make all the money. So finding a way to show that actually raving and bringing people back together again, that human connection that you get, that social connectivity, it helps mental health issues for young people who, they need to be with people, in the real world. Because, I mean, even things like dating apps, I mean, how can an algorithm figure out who's going to be your best match when you don't even know yourself, right? And you need that element of serendipity and just being out in the real world. Those kind of the random encounters that you get, in different environments, you actually need that. And so that's a huge positive side effect of holding longevity raves in all sorts of different venues and circumstances, because it's bringing people, and I would say the other element of this, it's all types of people, so across all ages. So what makes the longevity rave really special is when you actually bring together different worlds, different kind of communities and different networks. So you've got the baby boomers who may not have been dancing for a while, you've got the ravers, and of course a lot of the longevity scientists, are all ravers. And you bring them into this environment, and then of course what you see when you've got the magic and the power of the music and the lights and just the human connection and that kind of energy, these energy fields of people start worrying about, how do I look like? I haven't been dancing in a while. It's just that you just feel this pulse as a community of people, and you just kind of reduce everything to its most primal human level, that we're all connected by a very, very human connection. And it doesn't actually matter, and that's the beauty that you get in this sort of environment. And it kind of just reminds you that we're all in this together, and in a world that is so torn apart and has so many labels and so many categories and silos that you're put into, the rave breaks that all down, and it kind of confronts us to the realities of what makes us human, which is a beautiful thing. I think, a lot of it is really simple. I think, it is literally spending time with the people that you love and trust, who give you joy, and who need you as well, because that feeling of giving is also a really important part of it, not just taking. And kind of this, the simple pleasures in life. It's sort of like taking stock. It's like, being close to nature. A lot of people forget how important that is. Just being out in the sun, being, near trees. They often say that that's the biggest help, with mental health, is actually being close to nature. And being surrounded by things bigger than yourself, And this is where nature is very, very powerful. And I think, the obvious things, and of course I would say this, and this is one of the things that I do, yes, getting exercise, because, we sit around too much, we don't move around as much. And of course you get a lot of positive, biomarker effects from exercise, as we know, including in your mood. And of course eating healthy food, that is really, really important. Eating all this ultra high processed food, poor nutritional quality food, it really doesn't help your health or your mood. And so that's really, really important. But I would say the most important thing is just try and focus on doing what you love. And I know that's hard. We have jobs, you have to pay the mortgage, you have to pay your bills, and especially when you're young, you have to kind of take the first thing that comes, because you're worried about, getting your next job, all these sorts of things. We all have to kind of pay our dues, and there's that whole, and of course you might have a job that's very stressful, but try and work through and work out, how you can fill your life with the things that you feel passionate about, that you love. And hopefully ask the people around you to help you if you are in a stressed job, or or if you're going through a messy divorce, or, these are things that happen in life. But that's where you need to drop strength and inspiration from the networks around you who do care for you and who do love you. So I think, a lot of it is bound, around that kind of social connectivity, that human connection, which really needs to dominate the debate in longevity far more than it does. And that's why Longevity Rave is important. That's why I've introduced this whole idea around Joyspan, because I was interested that it was actually mentioned as an emerging investable opportunity. Because I think people, especially around the mental health crisis that we have, in all age groups, we really have to look at what are the sorts of innovations and that can really help to address that. And there will be money to be made. There are already loads of organizations and industries that are focused on giving us joy and pleasure. I think one of the things that we really need to be looking at is the role of women in actually being part of that solution. Because let's face it, we are the nurturers, in terms of family bonds. We are the ones who bear the children. We tend to be the ones who look after the children, especially in the early stages of their life. We tend to be the ones as the caregivers, midlife, for our grandparents or for our parents. So I think, there's a real need to look at how do we encourage more women to have that voice in shaping really where longevity is going, from a societal impact perspective, from an investment perspective, from the point of policy making. Because I think we would find that different questions would be asked, and that would force us to look at certain different solutions to some of the broader questions that I do think we need to be asking ourselves. Because I think it really boils down to what is the world we want to be living in, that we want our children to be born in and to grow up in. I think if you ask quite a few people, they would be a bit scared to answer that question right now in terms of where the world is heading. So I think it is a really, really fundamental and very important point that needs to be asked, I think, just generally in this whole longevity debate.